Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with myself, your host, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Healing Coach, for soul healing conversations, guests, and topics that are designed to support you in unveiling the nature of your true consciousness so you can embrace your destiny and not suffer your fate. If you hear something today that resonates with you, please don't forget to like, share, comment, or subscribe, as it really supports the growth and reach of this podcast by increasing its listenership, which makes this whole endeavor possible. In the meantime, please sit back, relax, and get ready to listen to this week's episode where I share the many challenges that people are facing today and how we can approach them with a sense of wholeness, health, and receiving what I call the whole piece of the pie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with myself, your host, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Healing Coach. And this week, I wanted to come on. This week, I'm doing a solo cast on the topic of, let's just call it the whole pie. And I don't know, that's just an image that came to my mind as I was preparing to come on and share with you the message, the content for this week regarding our approach to living. And I find that a lot of my topics, as you probably know, if you've listened to any of the past episodes, are always inspired by my own work in the world, my own personal spiritual journey, signs and symbols that arise in my consciousness that are really representative of the macro themes that we're processing at this time. And that we have the micro version, our personal version of those, and then the larger version, how they show up on the big stage. And so for me, a lot of these topics are not, we are not separate from the system, from the whole realm of consciousness that we inhabit. So that's kind of where I'm got this metaphor of the whole pie. Right? A lot of us have been compromising and negotiating for a piece here and a piece there, instead of realizing that we can actually have access to the whole thing, and that that's actually our birthright. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So a couple themes that I've been being drawn to over the past week, namely, number one is the greening principle of Hildegard Bingen, I believe you say her name that way. For those of you that don't know about her, you can check her out. She was, I believe, 12th century mystic who wrote copious notes on the nature of creation and the nature of the human organic being and nature itself. And she called this the divine greening principle, Veritas, because to my understanding, it describes the this lushness of the regenerative principle of life itself, and this essence that is in all of nature, whether it's an object like a rock or a flower or an animal or a human like us. But when you look at this word animal, and you look at the root anima, which is also the root of animate, and you think about that, the anima was a word that translated as the world's soul, and it was believed to be a feminine gender or energy, let's say, not gender, energy. And it is invisible. It's this animating force of life that gives shape to everything that we can see with our eyes in this physical world, but it's also been ignored, dismissed, downplayed, like behind the curtain on the stage. And that's kind of where I got the title for my podcast, Lifting the Veil on the Mysteries of Consciousness. Like, now is the time on the planet where a lot of the blind spots, a lot of the areas that we could not see for many reasons are now becoming available to our consciousness as we imagine new ways of being in the world to access this whole spectrum, or this whole pie, if you will, of being, of our beingness. And so this has largely been a product, this paring down of life, as a outcome of this scientific focus, because if in science, right, if you can't measure it, you can't put it into conceptual boxes, then it doesn't exist. So it remains in the margin. And so that's why a lot of this information has been relegated to religion and witchcraft and shamanism and energy healing and mystery schools and yogic sciences, and the domains of art and poetry have continued to write and produce pieces of art and poetry of devotion to this part of, or this aspect of life that is the marrow of everything. But it's this idea of the breath, or the spirit, or soma, the soul, that is refers to the process of this greening principle that Hildegard talked about. It's a giving of vigor, of life, of vitality. And the idea that all of matter is ensouled in it. And this is, there's a sense of nostalgia of like, well, if we could just go back to the time where there were hunters and gatherers and we could all live in harmony. But it's more than that. It's not about going backwards. It's about now taking everything that we know through our experience, through our evolution, and acknowledge that there is a greater expansiveness to life behind the intellect. That everything is teeming with what they call in yoga Shakti, this life force that is the material of the intellect itself. And this is all part of the reason why I love myths and stories and poetry and art so much, because it speaks to this aspect of life. So when we tell stories, it is this principle that enlivens the sound and the meaning with something that is beyond the language, beyond the idea. It speaks to this greater reality that the mystics like Hildegard of Bingen wrote about. And Hilda was a true mystic. She listened to the secrets of creation. She observed astutely not only human nature, but all the nature around her. And she began to record it. And this could be what we call today, like evolutionary cosmology. Cosmology meaning the beauty and the order of all that is in our frameworks of existence. And she did not exclude humanity from that. In fact, we were right in the center. And when you think about, she was a saint, and when you think about that in this biblical story, it is said that man and woman were born from the garden. So if that's not an organic metaphor, I don't know what is. But Hilda was writing eons before, what we have today is the modern green movement and the environmental ecology. And she understood that nature was both our primary matrix and our teacher. And that nature is the source of existence itself, and that is a reflection of consciousness itself. It's intelligent, and it is a wellspring of wisdom of what it means to be truly human. So if you just look at, for example, the veins in a leaf or the imprint of a tree's bark, it resembles our own bodily incarnation with our fingerprints and the veins running underneath our skin that pump this blood that is filled with oxygen, or the spirit of life, which allows us to animate our bodies and be present in our lives. But if we're not fully in our body, it's hard, right? We can't access that level of vitality that we were created for. And so a lot of this is, with the epidemics of obesity and drug addiction and the rise of suicide and the multiple interlocking crises facing our Earth community at this time, including the migration of huge groups of people because of global climate change who can't inhabit the land that they were traditionally living in. The mass extinction of species, animals all over the planet, the depletion of fresh water, the destruction of forests. And a lot of people clearly are feeling the symptoms of the destruction of nature as it's reflected internally of their own nature. A lot of people are checking out the level of what's being asked of us right now, the rate of change, the rate of clearing karmic patterns. People are asking, like, what can I do? How can I make an impact individually on this worldwide problem, or the problems that can keep many people up at night? And this reminds me of a fairy tale that my friend Christine has been writing about. She's been writing some poetry, and it's I wouldn't say it's a well-known fairy tale, but it is in some circles well known. And this story has been coming up in different modes for the past 3 weeks. And I first read this story when I was in my 20s. And it's come back around into my consciousness. And so just to give you a brief summary, I won't tell you the whole thing because it's, you can Google it and read it yourself if you'd like. But it's about a young girl who has her hands cut off by her father. So in the story, like everything's a metaphor, right? She literally, she's like literally handled by her handlers in order to create material riches for her father, who is unconscious. Like, he doesn't even know that he has done this to his daughter until after it's done. And so it really represents that a level of unconsciousness that we can never replace. Like in the story, he can never replace the value of his daughter, and ends up losing his very soul in this whole transaction. And this is really what's been happening to humanity right now itself. And so the question is, how can we invite this traditionally feminine energy, not necessarily a gender, but this the soul of the world, which is our soul, and instate the value and essence of light that she represents. And for me, I believe that it starts within, and what I call as the ecology of the self, or the ecology of the soul. And I'm not talking about the self, the conditioned personality that we created in order to survive a system that is bred on disconnection and being cut off from our internal experience. And once we begin to recommune with this internal nature, it will begin to reflect out into the world, in our institutions, in our systems, in our relationship with nature itself, because we are that. And I say that I can describe this as stepping into a more integral understanding of ourselves in the world, seeing ourselves as a part of nature, essential to the wholeness, and incorporate this view into every level of our society in a way that recognizes all aspects of a person's being. And I want to give an example, because examples always help illustrate in more abstract ideas and in more down-to-earth ways. So, for example, years ago when I was earning my teaching degree, I was assigned an end of the year semester project that I entitled Ecology of the Classroom. Because it occurred to me that there are many different sources and forces and information and agendas that impact that learning environment of a classroom. And ultimately, I was told my project was too grandiose, and I was given a B for not following the scope of the assignment. This is really the story of my life, because I was born as a visionary with the big picture always in mind. And I've always had this experience of trying to pare myself down to fit into a compartmentalized view of the world that is disconnected and made to seem like unrelated, when it's all related. And that if there are people or conditions that are showing dis-ease or illness, that is a reflection of the environment that they are inhabiting. And so we're going down to the roots of the system, not the superficial appearance of the system. And so this is a perfect example, the one I just shared with you, how these systems, while created to serve us, when they're left to their own devices, actually resist the very change that they claim to secure, like free thinking, progress, innovation. And I'm telling you all this because hopefully I want to illustrate to you that when we exclude or invalidate this internal knowing, our intuition, our natural intelligence and awareness of our own responses and reactions and senses that shape how we make meaning and how we work with others, then we're cutting ourselves off from our own nature and our own life force that Hildegard had spoke about. And that seems to be, to my observation, the main aspect of our being that we're being asked to awaken to right now. And this includes allowing ourselves to enter into our own bodily experience with a sense of reverence, with a sense of honor that few of us have ever been allowed, and explore our own capacity for empathy and feeling and expression. And when we do this, we not only honor our own humanity, but we honor humanity itself by building a greater awareness about how we hold our own consciousness and our blind spots of how we were taught to disconnect and to compartmentalize and cut off really our own hands, right? Based on our familial, social, and cultural conditioning, and how that affects each person that we meet and how we interact with them, and then what we see as possible and what those people we interact see as possible. And so that would be my main answer. And it's interesting because a lot of times, not always, but sometimes when people come to coaching, I sit down with them, we take an intake, take an inventory of their life, areas of their life they're feeling stuck or they're wanting some more growth, expansion, and development. A lot of times they'll want to go like, what is the strategy? And while the strategies are important, it's also bigger than that. It's a process of looking at one's own life as a field, right? As I talk about in the story of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a field, there is the sower of the seed. And our life is a field, and we've sowed lots of seeds all around us. A lot of them invisible, right? They're under the ground, we can't see them, but they're shaping our perception of ourselves and others. And that affects how we get to show up in the world, how we get to be, how much abundance we have access to, if we just get a slice of the pie or if we get the whole pie. And a lot of this is unconscious because it's connected to unprocessed pain. And our beautiful egos, our minds are doing us a favor by resisting or avoiding these ouchy areas, believing that they're saving us from undue suffering. But everything in life was meant to be witnessed, including the so-called pleasant emotions and unpleasant emotions, all of it. And when we resist or push away or curse or blame, we're saying no to life on one level. We're saying no to ourselves, and we're saying no to others. And so when we begin to shift our perspective of like, we are an organic system unto ourselves, and everything in our system is information that is there with the intent to support and to move life forward. And that when we begin to look at that way, we can feel everything. Because if we avoid it, it stays stuck. And it fixes the very condition out in our world that we're trying to get rid of or avoid. But it's like that poo-poo on the bottom of your shoe that you can't get rid of. And you're like, what's that smell? What is that? It's you, right? So, and it can be used as fertilizer for the cultivation of new life, new expressions, new growth for you. But if you don't know it's there, it's hard to utilize. It's hard to recycle. It's this regenerative principle of life that the divine greening principle that Hildegard of Bingen spoke about. And so when we become active tenders to our garden, and instead of avoiding the weeds or the dry portions or the unwelcoming habitats in our field, we can attend to them with love and compassion and care that they deserve. And so that's usually the first place that I go to when I work with people, because our life is a reflection of those energetic conditions, of that unseen aspect of all of creation. That is the power behind everything. And so I think I'll leave it there for now. If you'd like to find out more about the work I do, as always, I'll put my website address into the description of this week's podcast, along with 2 links to schedule one clarity session. It's 20 minutes, it's free. And we just kind of chat about where you're at and where you're wanting to get to and how I might be able to serve you. And there's also a link to one-on-one sessions, 60 minutes, and you can book that on my calendar as well if you're ready to start looking at how to rejuvenate consciously the field of your life. All right. Until next time, my friends, please remember what a valuable treasure you are. And if you heard something here that resonated with you, please feel free to comment, like, share, or subscribe, depending on the platform you hear this. I really appreciate your support. It helps me expand my listenership, which helps me continue doing this podcast each week. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your support and acknowledgement and all that good stuff. All right. Until next time, I'll see you next week, and bye for now.